My father's voice rolled across the probate courtroom before I reached my chair. Couldn't afford a lawyer, he said, loud enough for the back row. I kept walking. My heels clicked on the worn tile of Norfolk County Court as I hugged my leather folder and took the lone seat at the defense table. Dad wore the smug expression I had known all my life. My mother sat beside him with her polished smile. "This will be quick," she murmured. Their attorney, Richard Bellamy, adjusted a silk tie and looked at me with thin pity. Judge Harold Bennett entered. Everyone stood, and I rose automatically. 20 years in the Navy living in my bones. Rain tapped the tall windows. Bellamy stood. "Your Honor, this is a simple estate matter." Then the doors opened again. An older woman with silver hair stepped inside carrying a sealed envelope. Judge Bennett saw her and went still. "Miss Holloway," he said, almost reverent. Bellamy's confidence vanished. Margaret Holloway crossed the courtroom and handed the judge the envelope. "Direct instructions from Linda Carter," she said. It was to be opened only if her granddaughter appeared here without counsel. The judge broke the seal. He read one page, then another. His face changed so completely that my stomach tightened. Bellamy took the papers and turned white. My father shifted in his chair. "What is it?" he snapped. Bellamy stared at the final signature as if it had risen from the grave. "This can't be," he whispered. That was the moment my family understood Grandma had never left them in control. 3 weeks earlier, I had stood by Linda Carter's grave while my parents discussed her property as if she were already a footnote. I came in my navy dress whites straight from Norfolk. Dad barely glanced at me. "Still doing all that Navy stuff?" he asked. My parents talked all afternoon about taxes, the farmhouse, and how fast they could sell 12 acres that had held my grandmother's whole life. "You're never here," Mom said when I objected. I had heard that line for years. Never here for birthdays, never here for Christmas, never here when they wanted a convenient daughter. But I was the one who called Grandma every Sunday, the one who paid for her water heater, the one she trusted. That night, in a motel room smelling of old carpet and rain, I opened her final letter. Her handwriting shook. "You were never hard to love, Emily. Do not let anyone rewrite your life." I cried harder than I had in years. The next morning, Dad called to say the probate hearing had complications and that I should get a lawyer. Grandma had never been sloppy with paperwork, so I drove to the farmhouse and found my parents already there with a realtor. Boxes of Linda's things on the porch. Inside, one hallway frame looked crooked. Behind it was an envelope taped to the wall. For Emily, if necessary, it read. Inside was Margaret Holloway's card and another note. "Trust nobody else." I called Margaret the next morning. She answered on the first ring. "Your grandmother saved my career," she said. "She worried your parents would pressure the estate." Margaret told me to come alone and bring no attorney. I stood in front of the courtroom mirror that morning, buttoning my uniform, and told myself I was not a frightened girl anymore. When Bellamy argued that my grandmother had become confused near the end, I looked up and waited. Then Margaret entered in a dark coat carrying a briefcase. The room changed again. She presented the file. There were medical evaluations, notarized transfers, bank records, and Linda's own notes documenting how my parents had pressed her to alter her will. Bellamy flipped to the last page and froze. It was Margaret's signature confirming every instruction. Judge Bennett ruled in my favor within minutes. The farmhouse and land were mine, along with the savings Linda had set aside. The court also agreed to investigate my parents' attempts to manipulate her. My mother started crying. My father looked at me as if I had cheated him. I felt no triumph, only grief. Afterward, I went back to the farmhouse alone. I made Grandma's awful coffee and sat in her chair while Dawn in the kitchen. For the first time, I understood what she had really left me. Not property, but permission. A year later, the porch was freshly painted. Roses climbed the fence and the farm had become a home again. I used part of the inheritance to create a scholarship for Native kids in Eastern North Carolina. Mark began showing up more often. My mother admitted she had been afraid of my father for years. Even Dad came to the memorial gathering and told me he had been wrong. I did not forgive everything. I did not need to. I planted new flowers beside Linda's oak tree, sat on the porch at sunset, and felt peace settle where bitterness had lived. My grandmother had rescued me from a family that mistook loyalty for silence.